Oof, if you had told me in 2024 that the following year Max Verstappen would get his 4th consecutive Japanese Grand Prix pole, I would have said, meh. But in 2025, in the RB21, getting pole by 100th of a second, Suzuka is most definitely Max Verstappen's playground, and he showed it to full effect this weekend. In fact, the two McLarens must feel pretty annoyed about this. Just have a look at this. These are the sector times and the mini sector times, in fact, for the fastest 3 laps that Verstappen, Norris and Piastri did. And Piastri especially must be super annoyed that he lost a 10th and a half in that first sector alone, and put purples up for the rest of the lap. Wasn't enough. We are going to have a little look at why that happened. So, Verstappen versus Norris. 100th of a second. 1.2 hundredths of a second. That's all that separated them. But Max, ostensibly, for this season so far, has been in the 4th fastest car. He has been complaining about that Red Bull all weekend. It's got so much understeer, he says. So in the end, all he does is he says, right, let's push the aero balance as far forward as we can by stripping out the rear wing. Basically, he's got nothing. It's just a flat wing. No downforce. Super quick in the straights, but he shouldn't be able to do anything on those fast sweeping corners of Sector 1 and around Spoon and around the Degners. And yet, let's have a look at what he did. So we're going to have a quick look at Norris versus Verstappen. Q3, the quickest laps, but both of these drivers did. And we're going to start off in Sector 1 with the S's. So what can we see from the trace? So we've got our usual traces here. We've got our speed trace at the top. We've got our delta underneath. We've got our throttle and brake traces. Max is in the dark blue. Lando is in the orange. Sorry, papaya. And the difference between them is, as I say, tiny. There's almost no difference in terms of the overall lap time. But let's have a look at that speed trace first of all. So barreling into the first corner, Max is miles quicker. And you can understand with that rear wing how he's managed to do that, because there is basically no downforce at the rear. There's no drag whatsoever. He's just hurtling down the straight. So his end of straight speed is miles better than Lando's is. Add to that, coming into turn 1 and heading into turn 2, he brakes slightly later here than Lando does as well, coming off the throttle a fraction later as well, just to maintain that momentum. And it doesn't quite pay him back, but it does present a huge challenge to Lando Norris, because Lando's car has more downforce. Lando's car should be able to just waltz through the S's. And if you look at the delta through the S's, actually Lando does get that back down, but never to the point at the end of the S's where he's actually got quicker. In fact, heading into that tricky turn 7, that straight towards the Degners, Max is actually ever so slightly quicker. And as they head down the straight towards the Degners, if you look at the speed trace, Max is catching up again by the time they get to the end. So how come Lando, in a car that has more downforce, wasn't able to catch Max? Let's have a look at the speed traces. So again, ostensibly, Lando has the higher minimum speed, especially through this sort of turn 5, turn 6 section. You can see here on the throttle that Lando has to come out of the throttle much less than Max does. Max has to take a much bigger lift. And that, I think, is just because Lando has that bit more confidence that the entire car's balance is going to stick where he wants it to, whereas Max is having to second guess the rear end a little bit, but he's barreled in and he's gone for it anyway. And that shows the most into turn 7, that exit from the S's. Lando takes a quick stab at the brakes and then launches himself out, picking up the throttle earlier. Max just takes a big lift off the throttle and then absolutely plants it out of turn 7, and that for me is why he ultimately catches up towards the Degners. I want to point out that turn 1 again though, okay? That huge end of straight speed, that braking ever so slightly later, that's a pattern that we're going to follow, because what Max does is that he puts all of his faith into that turning, into that approach to the corner, knowing that he's going to lose a little bit on the exit, but banking on the fact that ultimately his end of straight speed, his exits are still going to be good enough to counter the fact that actually his minimum speed in the middle of the corner isn't as good as Lando's. You can see that right here. Just watch this space. This is us going into the Degners, and this is where I think that Banzai, appropriate for Japan, approach into the first part of the corner is really marked for Max. Again, look at that end of straight speed. He's much quicker than Lando getting into Degner 1. And remember, this is that quick, unsighted, blind, fully committed, just on faith right-hander. Little bit of a lift there, and as they barrel into it, you can see that Max comes off the throttle much later than Lando does. He takes so much more speed into that corner. Lando, by contrast, comes off the throttle much earlier, carrying again better minimum speed through the corner, and that pays him back. So although Lando is a bit slower getting into the corner than Max is, he regains that again on exit because he's been able to maintain that higher minimum speed. And again, that just speaks to a car that's more planted. Max, you could see it on the onboards as well. As he was coming through Degner 1, his exit is much wider, his approach to Degner 2 much wider than Lando's, because he's just carried so much more speed into the corner, and that's meant that he's had to scrub more off as he's heading into Degner 2 than what Lando has, and ultimately that means that Lando just gets a better exit and a better entry into the hairpin a bit later on. So here, again, Max tries that brake really late, attack the corner, just give it everything. It doesn't quite pay off for him in Degner 1 and 2, but this is where it does, and this is where Max just shows what Max can do. This is how he turned a deficit into a positive. This is into the Casio triangle, the last chicane, right at the end of the lap. Look at how late Max brakes. Look at the difference between Max and Lando. Max also overlaps the braking and throttle phase a little bit on turn. He's balancing it out a little bit. And if you watch this little video, this is what it looks like. Both these cars turn in fairly early actually, but Max has braked later, and yet he's still got the car rotated. And look what he's done. There's a cute little four-wheel drift into the apex of the corner. That's what he's done. He's unsettled the rear, which is easily going to come around because it's literally got no downforce. Turns the car, rotates it, floats it into that apex, and then that allows him the space to be able to aggressively, here we go, back at the telemetry again, aggressively plant the throttle into the right-hander, the second part of Casio, and ultimately then put his foot down hard. Although later than Lando, he does put his foot down later, but you can see here on the speed trace, as he exits, he's able to catch up to Lando. All of that, I think, is because of what he did into the first part of Casio, turning early, braking hard, rotating, floating that car into the corner. And that is ultimately where that late braking, give it everything, so unlike Max, finally worked for him and got him pole position. So I think there are two areas in which Max really earned his money today. The first was in that first sector where, despite having a car that didn't have the downforce, he didn't give away so much to Lando through the S's. Yes, he did lose time through the S's compared to Lando, but not enough for Lando to make it count. So when Max really did need to make it count, he did. He had the opportunity. He gave himself the opportunity in Casio to have this little bit of magic, and that's what got him pole position. There is nobody around Suzuka quite like Max Verstappen, and there's nobody quite like Max Verstappen in 2025. If you didn't believe it before, believe it now. As usual, please like, please subscribe, please leave us a comment. We'll read every single one. We'll reply to as many as we possibly can. Sorry about how late this one was, but we will see you guys straight after the race in the next one.